Before we begin the program, I request the following dignitaries to take their seats on the stage: Air Marshal Kapoor, Lieutenant General Patankar, Group Captain Sardesai, Mr. Sharat Chandra Phatak, Air Marshal Gokhale, Mr. Sahasrabuddhe, and Mr. Sudhir Gade. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. A short announcement before we commence with the program. As you all know, the shadow of the sudden and shocking chopper crash on Wednesday hovers over this pre scheduled program. India lost its first Chief of Defense Staff, General Bipin Rawat, and 12 others in that tragic accident. I request everyone to rise and observe 2 minutes of silence to pay our respects to the victims of Wednesday's crash and also to remember the fallen soldiers of India's armed forces and Mukti Bahini during the 1971 war. Thank you. Today's program is the grand finale and marks the conclusion of the lecture series that began on 15th January 2021. On behalf of the Maharashtra Education Society and the Center for Advanced Strategic Studies, I, Leena Chandorkar, welcome you to the eighth and final link of the Vijay Diwas Golden Jubilee commemorative lecture series. Undeterred by the pandemic and the restrictions, the lectures continued throughout the year. The program shifted online, but what remained unchanged was the impressive lineup of speakers, war heroes and veterans, who brought alive those heady days between 3rd December and 16th December 1971. 16th December 1971 is a landmark date in the history of modern India. It was on this day that Lieutenant General A.A.K. Niazi of the Pakistan Army and his 93,000 strong troops surrendered to the Allied Army of the Indian Armed Forces and the Mukti Bahini. This war gave birth to a new nation, Bangladesh. As a tribute to this golden jubilee year of the 1971 war, the Center for Advanced Strategic Studies, along with Maharashtra Education Society, planned through the year a series of lectures by eminent personalities. A few words about our parent institution, the Maharashtra Education Society, popularly known as MES, was established in 1860 by the revolutionary Vasudev Balwant Phadke, along with Sri Vaman Prabhakar Bhave and Sri Lakshman Narhar Indapurkar. Set up with the aim of providing knowledge, combined with strong patriotic values, MES aims to reach all sections of society. At present, there are 77 institutions run by MES that include schools, colleges, and vocational training institutions that are spread across the state of Maharashtra. Hardly surprising then that MES, which was founded by people driven by revolutionary zeal, should today, in 2021, take the initiative to embark on a year long lecture series commemorating a war that significantly changed the geopolitical map of the Indian subcontinent. It is time now to introduce our guests for today. For chairing today's program, we are indeed fortunate to have with us Air Marshal Sanjeev Kapoor, AVSM VM. Commissioned into the Indian Air Force in 1985, he has over 7,800 hours of flying various aircraft in his record. He is an alumnus of National Defense Academy, Defense Services Staff College, Flying Instructor School, College of Defense Management, and National Defense College. He is currently pursuing his PhD from Osmania University. A very learned man indeed. Air Marshal Kapoor is one of the pioneers in aerial refueling operations. He has done several instructional tenures and staff appointments. With effect from November 1, 2021, he took over as the Commandant of the prestigious National Defense Academy. Welcome, sir. I request Air Marshal Bhushan Gokhale to felicitate Air Marshal Kapoor. Our second guest for today is Lieutenant General Vinayak Patankar, retired, PVSM, UYSM, VSM. During his 4 decades in the Indian Army, Lieutenant General Vinayak Gopal Patankar held many important appointments in sensitive areas in the Northeast and the Kashmir Valley. He was part of the 1965 and the 1971 wars. During the Kargil conflict in 1999, he was commanding a frontline infantry division in Kashmir. Lieutenant General Patankar has been associated with think tanks within India and abroad and has contributed articles to leading journals and newspapers. Apart from his combat leadership, Lieutenant General Patankar is better known for his humanitarian approach and conducting people friendly operations even when dealing with insurgents and terrorists, first in Manipur and later in Kashmir. Lieutenant General Patankar now works with NGOs like Asim and Sarhad that work towards integration of the people from border states. Welcome, sir. I request Mr. Rajiv Sahasrabuddhe to felicitate Lieutenant General Patankar. Our next guest is a 1971 war hero, Group Captain Heman Sardesai, retired, Veer Chakra. He was commissioned into the Indian Air Force as a fighter pilot in 1965. During the 1971 war, he showed exceptional courage and was awarded the Veer Chakra for gallantry. From 1985 to 1987, he was deputed to Iraqi Air Force to train their pilots on the MiG-21 aircraft. He retired in 1994. We are indeed privileged to have you, sir, with us. I request Mr. Sudhir Gade to felicitate Group Captain Sardesai. Mr. Sharat Chandra Phatak served as a flight sergeant in the Indian Air Force from 1956 to 1977. Post retirement, he became an entrepreneur and is the proprietor of Jai Fiberglass Industry. He is the co author of the book The Valiants, The Martyrs of Indo Pak War 1971, which will be released today on this stage at the hands of the dignitaries present. A short introduction now of the other dignitaries on the stage. Air Marshal Bhushan Gokhale is an alumnus of Maharashtra Education Society. After retiring from a long and successful career in the Indian Air Force, he returned to his alma mater. As the president of Maharashtra Education Society and the director of the Center for Advanced Strategic Studies, he's the driving force behind this lecture series. Mr. Rajiv Sahasrabuddhe is an architect by profession. He is also the dynamic and visionary chairman of the governing body of the Maharashtra Education Society. Mr. Sudhir Gade is the assistant secretary of the Maharashtra Education Society. He is also a faculty at Abasaheb Galware College. Since today marks the grand finale of the Vijay Diwas commemorative lecture series, we have a special item on the agenda, which is felicitation of the volunteers who selflessly and tirelessly lent their energy, expertise, time, and charm to make the series a success. I request Air Marshal Kapoor to felicitate the student volunteers. Their names are Ketki Tupsakre, Mohitosh Jadhav, Onkar Pense, Arya Jagtap, Advait Savargaonkar.
May I request Marshal Kapoor, Commandant India, to felicitate our comparer, Dr. Chandorkar, please.
I now invite Air Marshal Bhushan Gokhale to give the opening remarks.
Thank you, Dr. Leena Chandorkar. She's also a great writer. I'm reading one of her latest books at the moment. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and the students behind. It's indeed a privilege for us at the Maharashtra Education Society and as a director for the Center for Advanced Strategic Studies that we have with us the Commandant of National Defense Academy, Air Marshal Kapoor, who's going to be chairing this last of the series of lectures that we've had to celebrate the Swarnim Vijay Varsh. As you know, as was mentioned earlier by Mr. Chandorkar, on the 16th is the actual Vijay Diwas when the Niazi signed the surrender. However, many of us have other programs, so we decided that today we will have this grand finale. As you know, tomorrow is actually 50 years ago was the Tangel drop. the para drop, which was second biggest after the, rather the second biggest, yes, after the both the wars that took place, the Second World War. So something that India should be very proud of, on which General Patankar is going to be speaking. And then, just short of the surrender, one of the things that shook East Pakistan, the governor as well as Niazi, was the attack on the governor's palace by four MiG-21s, which were led by then Wing Commander Bishnoi, who had along with him Group Captain Sardesai as one of his wingmen. And we'll be listening to Group Captain Sardesai on those operations. As you know, yesterday was also the unfortunate incident of the kukri which went down, and today also marks the helicopter heli lift across Meghna. So we were now getting very close to Dhaka, though we had this unfortunate naval incident or other in which Captain Mullah and of course everybody expired. And as Lena had mentioned earlier, and we stood for silent, it's a great loss for the nation, but I'm sure that we will rise above that. That's what the Phoenix does. And that will be the correct homage for General Vipin Rawat to continue with his legacy for integration and cooperation amongst the services. I'm very happy that today there are many veterans here. We have Air Marshal Bapat, we have Admiral Natkani, we have many others, including very, very senior Wing Commander Patwardhan. We have Brigadier Ajit Apte, who also spoke to us here. And of course, the staff officers and the other people from the NDA, and Mr. Anil Nene, who's come all the way from London, who's attending this series, and many others. And I welcome all the students, especially because you are the future leaders of India. And this great war, which changed the geography of the subcontinent, is something that you all must study in detail. There's a lots to learn, even in a victory, because there are many claimants to victory, but even then there are lots of things that one must learn from this particular war. So with these few words, I once again hand you back over to Mrs. Chandorkar. Thank you. Jai Hind.
As announced earlier, there will be a book release today at the hands of the dignitaries present on the stage. The book is titled The Valiants, The Martyrs of the Indo-Pak War, 1971, and it is written by Mr. Sharat Chandra Phatak. So, the copies of the books. Mr. Phatak, would you like to say a few words to the audience? Okay. I guess actions speak louder than words for Mr. Phatak. So you have to read the book to understand what he's trying to convey. It is time now to begin with the presentations by guest speakers. And the first speaker is Lieutenant General Vinayak Patankar. I also request the gentlemen on stage to take their seats amongst the audience, so that they can enjoy the presentation better.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Mhm. Can you all hear me at the back? Just raise your hand and I'll know that you can hear me. Yeah, okay. Thank you. Let me begin by thanking MES, thanking CAS, and in particular, A. Marshall Gokhale for giving me this opportunity to blow my own trumpet. Why I say that is one of the participants of the Tangail drop was a part of my regiment. I wear the regimental tie with great pride. Marshal Kapoor, great pleasure meeting you here. And you head an institution which is very close to our hearts. So we're particularly delighted. And amongst the audience, I can see a lot of friends and people whom I admire greatly for their achievements. Without further ado, let me get down to business. What I propose to do is to, before we get on to the details of the Tangail drop itself, I think it might be just worth our while to understand airborne operations. What do they mean? What exactly are these airborne operations? So let me touch a little bit on that before we get started. As the name suggests, these are operations where when we attack an enemy, either we attack him from one side or from two sides. It's called single envelopment, double envelopment. The airborne operations are the vertical envelopment. So that's to set it in perspective. Why do we do this? Because the enemy does its best to prevent your advance. If you're forcing ahead with a force with a view to capturing certain areas. Pardon me, I think my phone is trying to reach me. Well, that's out of the way. So as I was saying, as you're advancing into enemy-held areas, the enemy will do its damnedest to try and prevent your advance. And he does it by several ways, depending upon the kind of country you're operating in. In open country like desert, he will close the gaps with minefields. And in other countries like, a country which is open, but yet maneuvers are possible. And therefore, he will put up obstacles, various kinds of obstacles. After the 1960s, Pakistan in particular mastered the art of these obstacles, which were based on a canal or some kind of a ditch come bund. That was the kind of construction where the opposite side of the ditch or the canal or whatever was a little higher from where he could, bring down fire on you. Now, with this kind of an arrangement, it became very difficult or very costly in terms of casualties to advance. And therefore, there was a requirement to cross these obstacles and to reach behind the enemy lines. And that's where the airborne operations really provided a solution, if I might call that. These are very, very, very complex operations. And I say this not just to impress you, but if I just tell you a few things about them, you will understand why they're so complex. Firstly, it's an operation where more than one service is invariably involved, the Air Force and the Army, sometimes all three. if airborne operations are being held close to a coastline, then the Navy also plays a role. So when more than one service is involved, there is a great deal of coordination that is required. Secondly, when this kind of an armada is being put together, where a large number of aeroplanes have to be husbanded to carry a whole lot of men and equipment and weapon systems across and drop them behind enemy lines, then you need a great deal of coordination, of concentration of this force, and therefore that is another major challenge. When I explain to you the Tangai drop, I'll briefly touch upon a few of these points so that you'll understand the complexity in terms of real examples. Okay, that said, the other thing is that when you see, the point is, where do you attack? What do you go and capture behind enemy lines? Now you try and capture vital areas which will unhinge the way the defender wants to fight his defensive battle. He has a certain design of battle in his mind. If the enemy comes this way, this is how I'm going to stop him. This is where I'll bring him and I'll destroy him. That's his concept of operation in a sentence. But once the enemy does something which is unthinkable, that he lands up behind you, now suddenly he is completely unhinged mentally and physically both. So therefore, you choose an objective which will unhinge his defensive concept of defensive battle. You will also think of objectives in the rear of the enemy, which will speed up your advance. That means you try and create another front for the defender from another side. You see, it's easy to defend your territory when you're facing only in one direction. When you know the enemy is behind you also, you got to cater for an all-round defense. So that takes up more troops, more effort, and greater degree of difficulty. Okay, one last point before we go to the next issue, and that is, what kind of objective will it be? Will it be strongly held? No. In depth, the enemy sometimes either has pre-prepared positions which he hopes to occupy later in the course of the battle, or it is not held at all. You take, or it is something which will be like a funnel, like a bridge across a major river. Let's say the river is about 3/4 of a kilometer wide, or even more than a kilometer wide. You take Brahmaputra, you stand on one side, you can't see the other bank. So if there is a river like that, you need a huge effort to cross that, right? And therefore, the enemy does not expect you to do that in a great hurry. And the only way you can cross without actually constructing a bridge, to go over an existing bridge. So in depth areas, you pick up such places which are like a funnel, where the enemy forces will concentrate to cross the obstacle and then get in deeper into his own area. So a bridge, that is one of these ideal kind of objectives. Let's see if there are any other type of. Basically, airborne operations are of three kinds. One is the kind of thing which I just talked about, capturing a ground feature, like a vital area, like a vital defile, where, like a bridge, like I mentioned. You can also carry out an operation to go and capture an airfield, where you can initially go and capture the airfield and defend that airfield in such a manner that further waves of your own troops don't have to jump and land there. They can be landed, and heavy equipment, heavy weapon systems, and greater reinforcements will come by way of air very quickly, and that is called building of an airhead, right? So that can be another kind of operation is called an airhead operation. And finally, after the advent of the helicopter, suddenly there was a third option available, and that instead of jumping, you can either land by helicopter, or the helicopter hovers at a certain height and you can slither down on ropes. So that also became another way of vertical envelopment, as I mentioned a while ago. The restriction in the case of the helicopter, however, is the range. The helicopters cannot go very deep because of limited endurance and range that they can operate in. All this sounds very nice, but now comes the fly in the ointment. And what's the fly in the ointment? And that is, when such a lot of aeroplanes or helicopters are in the air and they are slow moving, they are not like fighter aircraft which go at breakneck speed, but the enemy, including their radar system, can pick you up almost from the time you take off. And he has all the time in the world to destroy this armada in the air. So what do you need? You need a situation where your air force, that is your air transport support, also can operate without fear of being shot down, which means you have to create a certain favorable air situation. Ideally, in Bangladesh, what happened was, it was not just a favorable air situation, it was air superiority. There was no opposition whatsoever because the Pakistani Air Force had been destroyed either on the ground or in the air in the first 3 days of the war. So that was a happy situation where we did not have to worry about enemy air interfering in your scheme of things. Okay. Why Tange? Now let's come to the actual operation and see why did we go to Tangail? What was the great necessity? Was it the glamour that, we did an airdrop also? It was the necessity. In fact, during the Bangladesh war, a number of interesting things happened. Things which could never, well, they were not in any kind of training manuals or in any kind of operational discussions that had been held before, where troops were airlifted by helicopters, by a continuous stream of helicopters, and battalion after battalion was taken across a river. Now, rivers in Bangladesh are really, really wide. Like I was mentioning about Brahmaputra, they are somewhat like that. In places, as you come closer to the coastline, the width of the rivers goes wider and wider, right? As a matter of fact, the entire area is so flat, Bangladesh, and it's so riverine, it's so full of streams, major rivers, minor rivers, tributaries, you name it, that every few kilometers you'll come across a water obstacle of sorts. So it's not easy for an advancing force to carry on building bridges and moving forward. It's not always possible. So you have to devise ways and means of crossing these obstacles rapidly, getting on the other side, and be ready to fight. The Pakistanis had anticipated this and had defended all these water obstacles in a very strong deployment. And they did make life quite difficult for our advance. And therefore, all these kind of innovative tactics were used, where helicopters were used just to cross the river, come back, and unfortunately, that time we had helicopters which we didn't have things like Chinook, which can almost take almost the better strength of a platoon. We could barely take, in 4s and 6s and maximum about 10, because the helicopters didn't have time to go back and refuel and do this again. So they had to come to a good understanding of what is the maximum number they can carry in any given sortie. So all that was done, and therefore the airborne operation was always on the cards. When we need it, we may have to use it. So what did the government do? Or what did the Army headquarters do? They concentrated 50 independent parachute brigade which is our only para brigade in the country, in the army, which has 3 parachute battalions and a parachute field regiment, which is this regiment, and which has artillery guns, which can be paradropped, and all other elements. We have engineers, we have signals, we have every other component which makes a self-contained force is part of that parachute brigade. That parachute brigade was concentrated near Calcutta, Kolkata now. That time it concentrated at Calcutta, by the way. So I was not wrong. It concentrated for a possible ground or airborne action, depending upon the necessity. Having done that, then at a certain stage, you know, as you are probably aware, let me show you on this a little. Well, I don't know whether you can really read the small print, but doesn't matter as long as you see the outer boundaries of Bangladesh, East Pakistan that time. The attack on Bangladesh or East Pakistan was from various directions, from all directions. So it was like a noose that was tightening. Initially, the strategy was to try and, you know, capture all areas along the periphery and force the issue. It was then changed to saying, no, we have to capture Dhaka, because Dhaka is the center of gravity of Bangladesh, or anyone who controls Dhaka will control Bangladesh or East Pakistan. I hate to say the word East Pakistan, so pardon me for saying Bangladesh. It found more friendly, right? So that was the idea. And as the noose tightened, and I mentioned to you that as you come closer to the coastline, the rivers become wider and wider. And see what you have here. Now here there are less number of water systems that you can see. As you come to the heart, you can only see blue, right? Or lots of blue. And therefore, the idea was somewhere here, when the noose starts tightening, we must be able to maintain the tempo of operation. Because as the noose tightens, automatically what will happen is all the Pakistani troops are going to get into that fortress. Fortress doesn't mean Chanwarwada. It means fortress like Pune district, right? I mean, from the entire East Pakistan, they would come down to a district size area, which is one of the districts was Tangail, by the way. And therefore, you will have greater concentration of the enemy and therefore greater degree of difficulty of punching a hole and going through. Since that was the problem, that is where there was always the possibility of getting behind the enemy and making sure that as he comes closer to Dhaka, he would be cut to size. Don't allow him to get into a tighter ring around Dhaka. That was the genesis of the thought. And second para battalion, actually we don't call them second because they are second to none. So we call them 2 para battalion, right? Now 2 para battalion, long history, it was actually 3rd Maratha Light Infantry. It was a battalion of the Maratha Light Infantry, 3rd battalion of the Maratha Light Infantry, which was converted into a parachute role and was renumbered 2 para battalion. Similarly, 1st battalion, the Punjab regiment, was converted into a parachute battalion and became 1 para. A battalion of 3rd battalion, the Kumaon regiment, became 3 para. These were the initial 3 battalions. Now we have 23 battalions, parachute battalions. Out of them, nearly 10 are special forces. So you can now see where we are going and how that expertise is being built in. Of course, one of our good special forces battalion is under a cloud at the moment, but I'm convinced in my mind 21 para, which is under a cloud in the northeast for so-called murder. I think that word is most inappropriate. I've worked with this battalion myself. They were with me in Kupwara and they gave a very fine account of themselves against the terrorists, a very fine battalion. So we have these battalions who have the expertise. So the parachute regiment is now really strong and rich. 2 para was selected for their operation, and 1 battery. A artillery regiment has 3 batteries, like 3 companies, and each battery has 6 guns. So a battery of 6 guns was combined with this force, and similarly a section of the engineers, some signal elements and so on, all that was grouped, and they were asked to concentrate at 2 places, Kalaikonda and Panagar. And of course, at a later stage, they came up to Dum. Those days, it was not Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose Airport, it was called Dum, which is the Kolkata airport. Anyway, but that we are getting a little ahead of ourselves. So the idea was, why Tangel and why 2 para? You see, as I told you, the nose was tight. Sorry, the nose was tightening all around, and here you may not be able to read this, but this is Jabalpur and this is Maimansingh. As you can see, they are on the home side or southern side of this large river here, right? So once you have crossed this major river system, you had a clean run all the way to Dhaka. So our 2 forces, 2 elements of the same force, this force was the 101 communication zone based at Shillong. They were made into a fighting force because communication zone actually is an organization for peacetime. It's like Pune sub-area, right? Pune sub-area is not a fighting formation. It is an administrative formation. But I won't now hold a class on which are the combat formations and which are administrative formations. But suffice to say, 101 communication zone was pulled out and told, we are going to give you sufficient forces and you will act like an infantry division. So they were given 3 infantry brigades, in fact more than 3 infantry brigades, and they started pushing the enemy from these. There was a major battle here at Jabalpur, another major battle at Maimansingh, and they were coming down. Now obviously it doesn't require, it's not rocket science to understand that all these Pakistanis here would now rush towards Dhaka, right? And make life more and more difficult for us to actually reach our target, which was Dhaka, and capture Dhaka or get control over Dhaka. So what obviously was decided is that let's get some troops here in this area who will oppose the withdrawal of these Pakistani forces coming towards Dhaka and try and destroy them. So they are not allowed to come to Dhaka. In so doing, they found that there was a useful bridge which they had to cross because of the water systems, the rivers and tributaries and what have you, there were not enough places to cross. And if you crossed over things like ferries, it would take forever. You know, ferries take a long time to fetch troops and material across. So a bridge that was crucial was just north of a small city called Tangail. This is the one. A little north of Tangail, there was a bridge over Loajang River called Pingley Bridge. Now, Pingley Bridge was the objective given to 2 para with 2 tasks which were given to them. Task number 1, destroy forces which are firstly capture and hold Pingley Bridge, deny it to the enemy. 2, destroy all forces, Pakistani forces withdrawing from the north to the south towards the Dhaka garrison, which means all around Dhaka. They wouldn't be all sitting inside Dhaka. They would, lay a big perimeter around Dhaka to defend Dhaka. So don't allow them to do that. And when the fighting gets tough here, some people from the Dhaka garrison, in a desperate bid to, to facilitate their withdrawal from here, may send reinforcements from south to north as well. So the second task was to prevent reinforcements going from south to north. So north to south and south to north. Hold them at this pivot. Mind you, there were two Pakistani brigades withdrawing. In fact, one had more or less been decimated, but at least one brigade worth, which means 3 infantry battalions. Each battalion, we are looking at about 800 fighting strength, 2,400 troops, plus other troops which were, gathering from all other areas. So it was expected that a total of nearly 5,000 to 6,000 troops would be withdrawing. And they had to be stopped by this one infantry battalion, which was all told about 700 to 800 people, including the infantry element and the others. Anyway, that was a task. That's what the airborne troops are required to do and trained to do and look forward to doing once at least in their lifetime. So that was the task allotted. Now let's talk about how this was executed. All right. Here, really the story of the operation starts. 11th December was chosen as the D-Day, as the day when the drop would take place. So by 9th of December, force was concentrated at Kalaikunda and Panagarh, and all the air element also started concentrating. Now to drop 700, 800 paratroopers with their equipment. Now this is where I told you that I'll tell you the complexity. You're not jumping just you're not just dropping 800 bodies there with one rifle and some bullets. You have to give them ammunition, at least 100 tons of ammunition. That's what it would be. Drop 6 guns, their ammunition. Then you have mortars, their ammunition. So the ammunition itself would be several hundred tons, plus other equipment. You need radio batteries, you need, all kinds of equipment that is used in fighting or in maintenance of sustenance. All that was required, even replenishment of the small arms ammunition. So all that was required to be dropped, and it was worked out that you require at least 50 to 52 aeroplanes. To make that number, you have to actually pull in all kinds of aeroplanes. Now here's the complexity. Different size of aeroplanes fly at different speeds, right? Their characteristics are different. I better not talk too much. There's a transport pilot guru sitting here, but suffice it to say that they have their own peculiar operating parameters, and therefore that has to be taken into account. Their endurance is different. Some people carry, some aeroplanes carry more fuel, some carry less, some have greater endurance, some have less endurance, and so on and so forth. The carrying capacities differ. Some transport aeroplanes cannot execute a heavy drop, which means you have to open the whole hatch at the back and push out heavy drop like a gun or a jeep or a couple of jeeps. And now, of course, even bigger vehicles are dropped from the air. But that was, if that was not good enough, imagine if all aircraft have to line up one behind the other and take off one after the other. Firstly, to load so many people, and this thing takes time. When you drop a heavy equipment, there is a cluster of 6 to 8 to sometimes more parachutes which are to be packed and put on top of that load. To load this whole thing inside an aeroplane is an exercise by itself. Now, you can't do that in broad daylight in front of everybody. So you have to do that, in a secluded area somewhere. And like I was saying, if they have to take off one after the other, by the time the last aeroplane takes off, the first aeroplane may well be over the dropping zone. You can't have that kind of a situation that for about an hour or 2 hours, paradrop is going on and on. What will happen to those first few guys who have landed up? They'll be, just a handful, and the enemy is already watching you coming down like that. What defense will they have? So therefore, they have to take off from multiple aerodromes and then combine in the air, and they can't just say, okay, I'll see you there on the DZ. No, you have to combine them into a stream, an airborne stream. So they fly in formation and do a formation drop. So at one time, number of parachutists are being dropped, and they gather together quickly to have some kind of a sizable strength on the ground to do whatever they're supposed to do. So that was one part. Then I told you the heavy drop, the kind of things that, okay, I mentioned about two services being involved. There's a little command control, situation here. Who's in command? Is the Air Force in command or is the Army in command? Air Force says, unless we take you there, you guys are no good, right? And the Army would turn around and say that, okay, you will fly over the area. That's no good either, unless we jump out and do the stuff on the ground. So there's a very nice way the command of this airborne force passes from one to the other. After the stream takes off, the command is of the Air Force. After they land, the command transfers to the Army. So they did. At 2:30 on 11th of December, they took off from these multiple aerodromes in full view of everybody. They even used Kolkata International Airport. So everybody who was around, all the foreigners, the media, everybody, they all saw it. And it was taken, you see, there was a very clever ploy here. They were allowed to see it. You see, they could have very well vacated those and say, there's some operation going on, so you can't be here. They were allowed to see it. The result was, BBC reported that approximately 5,000 paratroopers have taken off from Dum Dum. In actual fact, there were not more than 800, right? That news naturally was picked up by the Pakistani media, and they thought a whole parachute brigade with 3 battalions and the whole Jingbang lot is being dropped. And in the meantime, Meghna River was being crossed by helicopters. So they thought there is a heliborne force coming from the other side. And as you will see towards the end, I'm going to show you a 1.5 minute clip of that, how even Niazi sent a wrong or assessment to General Headquarters in Rawalpindi of the force that was being dropped. They dropped at about 4 o'clock. Unfortunately, the drop was scattered, although it was safe. Now that area, like I told you, is so full of water bodies and so on. Every village has a number of ponds around. Now at least half the force dropped inside ponds. The commander of this force was that time Lieutenant Colonel Pannu. Now Pannu himself went inside one of the ponds. Some of our guns went inside ponds, had to be pulled out. But granted to the brave guys, they pulled out those guns. Some of them were at least 5 to 6 feet deep inside the pond. They were pulled out, they were brought into action, and they were ready even before the paratroopers moved off from the DZ towards the objective. The first thing that happened was a small patrol, strong patrol, under a man called Captain Surjit Singh of 2 Para, was sent ahead to see what is the enemy situation. So when he went and made contact, he was fired upon, but he went ahead still. Those people at the bridge was just one platoon, about 30 odd men. And they had seen this whole drop take place. And then they found some people have come forward and they are firing at them. So they decided discretion is better part of valor, live to fight another day, etc., etc. So they ran away. So 2 para did not have to fight at all. From the DZ, when they moved, Surjit reported that I'm already at the bridge, these people have run away, and I'm now deploying around the bridge. So the rest of the battalion made all speed and reached there. By 7 o'clock, the battalion was completely in place. Now, let me show you a very quick sketch. This is where the dropping zone was. Actually, one small little thing, if I may take another just 5 minutes. There was a little deception carried out. We realized that it was going to be a daylight drop. Everybody is going to see it. People at Damlam, I told you, would be able to report this exactly how many aircraft have taken off and so on. So a deception dummy drop was done a little north here somewhere by 2 Caribou aircraft. The aircraft in this stream, the sequence in which the drop normally takes place is you send out a plane load of pathfinders. They go ahead, they land, and they lay out the markings on the ground to indicate to the incoming stream where to start the drop, where to end the drop, where is the DZ, and so on. So the pathfinders were sent, one each to this dummy, to the, one DZ here and one DZ here, because it might so happen that when you land up at the DZ, it is already held by troops. Then you have to shift to the other DZ. Hopefully, that's not occupied. What had happened was a Captain Ghosh from the Parachute Brigade Signal Company, there's a signal man, he had been infiltrated about 8 days ahead. And he met a local Bangladeshi operator, name escapes my memory at the moment, and together they had gone to this area and already did a reconnaissance and said this area is fit. So that message had come back saying the DZ is all right. So you didn't really need to have the second DZ. Anyway, so they dropped. When they dropped and touched the ground, all the villagers started running away, thinking the Pakistanis have suddenly come and deployed here in desperation, you know, to stop the Indian army. When the Jawans saw them doing that, guess what? One smart Alec said, "Joy Bangla." The moment he said "Joy Bangla," all the villagers turned around and said, "We want to come and help you." So all the material that had scattered over 2.5 kilometers, I told you, tons and tons and tons of equipment, they helped them. They helped them to pull out the guns, they helped them pull out the jeeps and so on. And with their help, the whole night this went on. And by midnight, 2 para with all, and there's one gun, of course, went inside water. Another gun didn't drop at all because something went wrong with the release mechanism. So it went back to Kalaikonda. And 4 guns with their ammunition were ready, and battalion had deployed like this. At 7 in the morning, or in fact it was between midnight and about 4 o'clock, they saw a whole lot of vehicles coming with lights fully on and long stream of vehicles. So they prepared themselves, allowed them to come within little less than 300 meters and opened fire. The Pakistanis were taken by surprise and they tried to fight back. The people at the end of the convoy turned around and went back, and the others were actually destroyed. They were good about over 200 casualties amongst the Pakistanis, not a single casualty in 2 para. So that was the first. Thereafter, an infantry battalion that was withdrawing from here, 33 Punjab. So this is where the confusion is. They have a Punjab regiment, we have a Punjab regiment. So sometimes, unless you know the number, you don't know whether it's Pakistani Punjab battalion or the Indian Punjab battalion. It's much easier when it is 31 Baluch because you know exactly who they are. So 33 Punjab was preparing for an attack on this That attack came at 7 in the morning, was also defeated, another 200 plus casualties. Overall, there was a mighty, success in terms of what 2-para was able to achieve, and the execution part was fully executed as per plan. Even if things went wrong, they managed to overcome those little glitches here and there. But finally, by 12th, now what is crucial is this force cannot continue fighting like this because they've got limited resources, right? Unless there is a resupply or a ground link up. Now the ground link up was done by a sister battalion. Happily, like I told you, 2-para was old 3 Maratha. First Maratha battalion, called Jangi Paltan, came from the north along this axis. Sorry. I'm sorry, this is all going wrong. Okay, yeah. And they met one para, one Maratha and 2-para met, and thereafter a link up was established. Thereafter, rest is history. Yeah, the para battalion happened to be the first ones to enter Dhaka, and on their heels came first Maratha, Jangi Paltan, and of course everybody else. And then very soon thereafter, 11th this happened, and 16th, as you know, the surrender was agreed upon. So in those 5-6 days, the battle really raged all around Dhaka, and ultimately, when it reached up, they gave up. I just want to show you one small clip and end this talk. Can you please show that? I've taken a few minutes more because I was given time till 5:30.
The drop at Tangail to cut off Pakistani forces headed for Dhaka on the 11th of December was another defining moment of the war. It was the Indian Army's biggest airborne operation yet, involving 700 paratroopers being airdropped in the rear of the Pakistani forces. The sky was full of parachutes, and the aircraft was flying wave after wave, dropping the paratroopers, recalls one Indian paratrooper. Pakistani soldiers, however, mistake the Indian paratroopers for the desperately awaited Chinese soldiers they were expecting, and there is a brief moment of jubilation before the crushing realization that they were indeed Indians. To make matters worse for the Pakistanis, foreign news agency broadcasts erroneously reported that about 5,000 paratroopers had been dropped in this area, which further unnerved Lieutenant General Niazi at Dhaka. In fact, Niazi sent a frantic message to the Chief of General Staff of Pakistan saying, enemy heli-dropped approximately 1 brigade south of Norshangudi and landed 1 para-brigade in the Tangail area. Request friends arrive Dhaka by air first flight 12 December.
Friends being Chinese.
The march of Indian paratroopers from Tangail to Dhaka unnerved the Pakistanis and shook them to the core. The picture of the paradrop was splashed across the front pages of leading newspapers around the world. This proved to be a great psychological blow to Niazi and his fighting troops isolated in the east by the Western Pakistani command.
Thank you very much. Jai Hind.
Thank you, General, for that wonderful presentation. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is time for the next presentation. Group Captain Heman Sardesai, I request you to come to the stage.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys. I am thankful to Bhushan Gokhale and Mr. Sahasrabudhe for inviting me to address this August gathering and in a concluding session for the uh, Vijay Diwas preparations. Basically, most of the time what happens is we do not understand what is war and why the wars are fought. And the younger lot probably needs to understand what it is actually, what it actually means. The final assault by Indian Air Force. What is war? War is an intense armed conflict between states, governments, societies, or paramilitary groups such as mercenaries, insurgents, and uh, militias. It is greatly characterized by extreme violence, aggression, destruction, and uh, mortality using regular or irregular military forces. Warfare refers to the common activities and characteristics of types of war or of wars in general. Total war is warfare that that is not restricted to purely legitimate military targets, not and can result in massive civilian and other non-combatant sufferings and casualties. While some war studies scholars consider war a universal and ancestral aspect of human nature, others argue it is a result of specific socio-economic or ecological circumstances. A background to 1971 conflict. Most of us know through variety of things published in papers and books and things like that. But I think it will be better if I explain what it is. The Indo-Pak conflict was sparked by Bangladesh liberation war, a conflict between the traditionally dominant West Pakistan and the majority East Pakistanis. The political tension between East Bengal and West Pakistan had its origin in the creation of Pakistan as a result of partition of India by the United Kingdom in 1947. The popular language movement in 1950, mass riots in East Bengal in 1954, and mass protests in 1969. These led to the resignation of President Ayub Khan, who invited Army Chief General Yahya Khan to take over the central government. The geographical distance between the eastern and western wing of Pakistan was vast. East Pakistan by over 1600 kilometers, 1000 miles away, which greatly hampered any attempts to integrate the Bengali and Pakistani cultures. The start of the war. As you, most of us are aware, that on the 3rd of December, Pakistani Air Force attacked 6 airfields and one radar station in the west. Besides the army incursions in the western sector, on the east side also, similarly, there were attacks by the Pakistani army. So on the third night, we were called and informed that the war is on. Finally, we will be dealing with Pakistanis in an appropriate manner. So how did it start? And since it was totally a combined effort, there was Army, Navy, Air Force, and Mukti Bahini coordination. The first, on the fourth, naval aircraft bombed Chittagong runway and damaged the runway. Mukti Bahini setting fire to fuel storage in Chittagong from a modified Otter aircraft. You will be surprised. Otter is a very small transport aircraft for basically used for transporting people or very small equipment. Canberras from Gorakhpur attacking Tezgaon and Kurmitala runway at night. Indian Army was slowly but surely moving towards Dhaka, assisted by IAF in attacking armored tanks, artillery, guns, and troop concentration when required. When I say when required, there are occasions when you face the enemy either in greater numbers or with greater power, that they have more ammunition or no more bigger guns or some such thing, where you need support to neutralize that, where what is coming to a problem area, and that is when they ask for the Air Force to intervene, and that is what was done on the 4th also, and followed by low-level attacks over airfield and other targets by Hunter and Sukhoi 7 aircraft. Sukhoi 7 and Hunter have been traditionally basically ground attack aircraft, not so much as the air defense part. So this is how the war started as far as India was concerned. On the 4th, I must give you a little information. On the 4th, my first sortie was in support of the army, Indian Army, in Rajendraganj, Mahendraganj area, which is northwest of northwest corner of Bangladesh. Now Bangladesh, then East Pakistan. And we were supposed to attack a brigade headquarters. And during this process, when we started the attack, after the second attack, the forward air controller is a person, the Air Force person, Air Force pilot basically, who is assisting the army for selecting the appropriate targets, and when the aircraft arrive, guide those attacking aircraft on the correct target, because it could be misunderstood or identified, and the pilots could attack something different or something not wanted by the army. And that is how the first attack was guided by a forward air controller, and he kept telling number 2, that's the target, give them hell, and all kind of other abuses that he kept pointing at, and number 2 was me. We repeated that strike in the evening because then Group Captain Wallen realized or felt that I had seen something. So he said, we will go again. Hemu, you lead this strike, and everybody else will fire where I am firing. Hemu is firing. And that is what happened. And that was the brigade headquarters, which was in total tatters as far as the Pakistani army was concerned. And as the army personnel will be more aware that when the brigade headquarters withdraws, it doesn't withdraw just 5-10 kilometers. It withdraws in a brigade headquarters withdraws or to a greater distance. So during that process, a large number of ammunition and a lot of prisoners of war were picked up, and well, it became easier for our army to move a little further. On the 4th and 5th, the initial attack by the Hunter and Sukhoi aircraft was a traditional method of attacking. That means approach the target at low level, pull up to a certain height, say 3,000, 4,000 feet, get into a shallow dive of 10 to 15 degrees, and release and fire your weapons. Weapons means it could be mostly not bombs, because bombs could skip at when it is fired in a shallow dive, but front guns or the rocket projectiles, or maybe napalm bombs or some such thing. So these were uh, the aircraft arrived over Dhaka because that was the known airfield where the Pakistani Air Force was also operating. So they came and fired their weapons, but it was such an unfortunate thing. On the first day, we had they had Pakistan had what you call it, the ACAC, the anti-aircraft artillery, and when they opened up fire, we lost 6 hunters on the first day and a Sukhoi the next day, and 2 hunters were shot down by the F-6 Sabre aircraft on the 4th and 5th. This was a huge loss to accept, and it was realized that this was due to this method of attacking coming out at low level and a shallow dive. So on the 6th, the method of attack was changed. Also, the weapon that was to be used was also changed. On the 6th, we did steep glide, that is 45-degree dive. We approached at low levels, but we did a 45-degree dive and released our weapons at about 4,000 feet, starting from about 12,000 feet. And we had carried the Russian M62 bombs. M62 is the year of manufacture, but these were very streamlined bombs and they had huge impact. And on the 6th, when we did fire these bombs or drop these bombs, huge craters were created. Very huge crater. I mean, like to give you, you will see the picture a little later. And this was because the losses that we suffered due to this radar on the 4th and 5th. This radar, this is the AR-1 radar. This was located in Dhaka civil area, and they had raised the antenna from its original manufactured height, which resulted in the range at which they were picking up the aircraft, the enemy aircraft or our aircraft, increased substantially, and the clutter on their scopes also reduced reasonably, where they could carry out the guiding of the and warning of the ACAC and the sabers to intercept. And that is the result of that those losses which took place on 4th and 5th. The bomb damage was, it's not very clear picture, but you can see the dark patches on the runway. And the runway was literally littered, because initially, though only 4 aircraft came and attacked, that is Vinkonda Bishnoi, Bhatia, Ratnaparki and myself. All the bombs had landed on the runway, And once this runway was damaged, there was no space for any aircraft, especially the fighter aircraft, to take off from this. And so subsequently, like the general mentioned earlier, that there was hardly any flying activity from Dhaka, especially because otherwise other places they had this Jessore and other airfields, but those airfields did not have any fighter activity because the runways were small or probably they didn't have adequate aircraft. No. So this was the bomb damage on the 6th. After 6th, though we continued bombing these places periodically, the Kurmitala and Tezgaon runway, uh, I will go a little further, step by step, on a daily basis, like almost daily basis. On the 8th and 10th, on the 10th, we carried out uh, attack on Mainamati, C.D. Chandrasekhar and myself. C.D. Chandrasekhar was hit by either a small arms fire or some kind of a weapon, and his oil pressure went to zero. As the oil pressure dropped, because the fighter aircraft, the RPM, the engine RPM is very large, very high. And if there is no oil in the engine or oil pressure becomes zero, then the engine could seize within literally seconds. So we decided that we will go land at the nearest place. Guwahati was still quite far. So I escorted Mati Hills, and where he was hit, I escorted him, saw him land at Agartala. I saw that he had, slowed down and come to a halt. That is when I decided to return back to Guwahati. While we were aware that there was very little activity taking place, enemy activity, any enemy air activity taking place, I decided to climb up and get assistance from the radar located at Shillong. I climbed up to about 4.5 kilometers without actually opening power, but so that I don't consume too much fuel. And by the time I landed at Guwahati and switched off, went to the dispersal, my engine had actually switched off. It had flamed out. Fortunately, I was in the dispersal, but this is just to highlight that when we say in fighter flying, in enemy territory, there is no space for a single aircraft doesn't have a space. You have to have somebody to guide you or somebody to be with you till the danger is over. And that is what I did as it was drilled into us while the flying training was going on. Then the next uh, this thing was that we would attack the governor's house because there was a lot of realization, a big realization for the Pakistan that this was not going to be a winnable war. They are going to be in serious trouble. General mentioned that we had this thing at Narsingdi. Narsingdi had a small runway, not a pakka runway. It was a grass strip, but it was noticed on the 10th of that month, 12th of that month, that some activity had taken place, and it was realized that why has this aircraft come? Then they realized that the aircraft has possibly come to take away some important personalities from the East Pakistan government or some military personnel, maybe pilots, fighter pilots, or any of these other people. So it was decided that we will attack that runway. But before that, we had to try and warn the pilot who had brought the uh, aircraft from Kakyab, from Burma. He had come. He had landed at that place. So we carried out attacks at night using air-to-air missiles, do a circuit over that Narsingdi runway and fire the missile in general direction to basically make a noise and keep that pilot awake. Ajit Bhavnani was the first one to leave from Guwahati at night, take off from Guwahati at night, followed by me, and the third one was Flight Lieutenant Bala. And I think the pilot got the message that he said he can't really uh, now stay on, so he took off somewhere in between the our visits or early in the morning. Early morning, I led a strike with 4 aircraft carrying the same M62 bombs, and we all bombs landed on that very small runway, about maybe 1,500 feet, and the runway was totally damaged. This also gave an indication that the enemy was closing in onto Dhaka. The next attack would be on Dhaka. On the 14th, there is a wireless experimental unit which operates on the borders or within the headquarters areas, where the HF, VHF, UHF frequencies are monitored and recorded. Also, they are deciphered if there is any encryption of these encrypted messages come. And on the 14th, this is what happened. On the 14th, it was discovered that from morning there was a huge amount of activity going on. Messages were being transmitted from the governor's house or governor's office to West Pakistan, which was this. Now this traffic was monitored, and the surprising part, as I mentioned, the person realized that most of these messages were encrypted. And as they were encrypted, they said, we need to decipher them. And when they deciphered these messages, it was discovered that Governor Mr. Malik had called for an urgent meeting of the United Nations representatives who were staying at the Intercontinental Hotel, the army personnel, that is General Niazi, and the their naval senior most person, and the Air Force people, with the secretary to the government. So there was quite a big gathering of, so to say, they were very important people. The message was conveyed by this experimental unit, wireless experimental unit, to Eastern Air Command and Air Headquarters. Simultaneously, it reaches Air Headquarters, and it was discovered that possibly this meeting is for either stopping the war or talking about surrender or some such important decision. Then we were told that at 10 o'clock, this decision was taken by the Eastern Air Command that now we need to attack the governor's house and not delay any further, because the meeting was at 10:45 and we had about 30 minutes, 25 minutes of flying time from Guwahati to Tezgaon, Dhaka. So the 4 aircraft got airborne. Again, Vinkwano Bishnoi, Flight Lieutenant Bhatia, Flight Lieutenant Bala, and myself. We reached the place around 10:45 or 10:50. The meeting was just probably in progress at that time, or just started progressing, when we attacked the governor's house. We delivered, each aircraft carries 32 rockets. We delivered in first wave 64 rockets, and the second, that is Bala and myself, again 64 rockets. Bala and myself, we kept changing the direction of our attack by about 30 to 40 degrees so that all sides of the bungalow, the governor's house, was attacked. And if they were trying to escape from some side, they would probably get caught. But I don't know whether it had any effect or not. But this is what the result was. Inside the governor's house, this is the governor's house from outside. Now you will say why I showed that thing first and not this. This was on the 18th of December when we were taken to see what we had done during the period of war, that is from 4th to 16th. This is Wing Commander Bishnoi on the left and Squadron Behel on the right. This is how it looked, the governor's house. But as I said, this was what had happened inside. So this is the process of our. Should have shown this little earlier. This is the bomb crater created by our M62 bombs. Both the bombs, two bombs we carried, two bombs go simultaneously and they hit the ground also simultaneously. This is the crater that has been created by these two bombs. On the left is me. Behind me is Wing Commander Vishnoi. Next to me is Flight Lieutenant Bhatia, and the Sikh gentleman is Manbir Singh, Flight Lieutenant Manbir Singh. I'm showing this specifically to highlight Manbir Singh is a 6 feet 2 inch tall Sikh gentleman. Now you can see that if you, I mean, we were not at the bottom of the crater. We were somewhere maybe 2-3 feet above the bottom. And if you put Manbir Singh on top of himself, you will see that it will go to about 15 to 18 feet high, the total depth of the crater. And the circumference of the bomb, that crater, was something like about 40 to 50 feet. And we had dropped, on the first day, we dropped 6 bombs, 4 aircraft, and dropping 8 bombs. With all bombs landed on the runway of that particular day and made it impossible for them to repair these. Subsequently, we kept bombing Tezgao and Kurmitola, both the runways, throughout the war. This was on the 6th that we dropped, and this was not repaired because this picture was taken on the 18th of December. It was not repaired, so we could take this photograph, for our retention and for our memory. Of course, this resulted, that bomb strike and the disruption of the meeting that the governor had called. Possibly they decided that they need to surrender or ask for a stopping of the war. But you all are aware that General Manekshaw and General Jacob, they had said no surrender, no, nothing else but surrender will be accepted, or we continue the war. and the message reached them, and they understood that at this state, or if you continue the war, there will be total annihilation as far as the Pakistan army was concerned. And since so, we decided, or this resulted in the surrender ceremony. On the right hand side are the Pakistan army personnel, laying down their arms on the ground, and on the left, the famous photograph, which I'm sure everybody has seen any number of times. There is General Niazi signing, General Arora on the left, and the other dignitary, General Jacob, is there. Uh, Polymera is there in between the two gentlemen behind General Niazi. You can see just his face. Polymera became the air chief a little later. So this is all that I have to say about the war. During this process, well, I did a total of 21 sorties by day and one sortie by night. The night sortie was over Nursing D runway, and the other 21 sorties were in the, like as I said, about uh, bombs dropping on the first day, not first day, on the 6th, and the uh, maybe the rest of the accuracy or whatever that was achieved during that process, because we were very highly charged at that particular time. Uh, Maybe because of our CO, maybe because of our flight commander or the other crew that we were associated with. Anyway, so that is when I was my of course the award was declared only later on in January, but it was a very satisfying period of time, and I think we achieved our aim. I have finished. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Your presentation brought to mind a poem written by Gordon Beauchelle, who wrote it after watching the Battle of Britain dogfights from the streets of London. It is titled simply The Aeroplane, and I quote: I sweep the skies with fire and steel. My highway is the cloud. I sweep, I soar, aloft I wheel, my engine laughing loud. I fight with gleaming blades the wind that dares dispute my path. I leave the howling storm behind, I ride upon its wrath. I laugh to see your tiny world, your toys of ships, your cars. I rove an endless road unfurled, where the milestones are the stars. And far below, men wait and peer for what my coming brings. I fill their quaking hearts with fear, for death is in my wings. End quote. With that image of the aeroplane etched in your mind, I turn now to Air Marshal Kapoor, who is chairing today's session. I request the Air Marshal to come on stage. Along with him, I also request Lieutenant General Patankar, Group Captain Sardesai, Air Marshal Gokhale, Mr. Sahasrabudhe, and Mr. Sudhir Gade on the stage to take their places on the stage. Sir, Marshal Kapoor, you can start.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Can you hear me at the back? Please raise your hands. Yeah, okay, thank you. I'm indeed fortunate to be here today amongst all of you. The effort taken in by the team of Maharashtra Education Society, and especially ably led by A. Marshal Gokhale sir, is so praiseworthy that words are less to communicate my feelings. Amongst us today are the veterans about whom we have read in the books. And probably you would, when you grow up, would realize that the people who have actually taken part in 1971 war, by the way, Marshal Gokhale also took part in 71 war, and today is exactly 50 years before that we are seated here. It's so nicely timed by A. Marshal Gokhale, the whole process of these lectures, that it culminates at the time when we are celebrating the Vijay Diwas. I would like to place on record my sincere thanks to A. Marshal Gokhale, Shri Sahastra Budheji, Shri Gade, Professor Chandorkar ji, Professor Chati, Dr. Mahendrate, Professor Mani Bhate, the Sainik School cadets. The parade today that has been put up was outstanding. I could see in the girls' eyes the passion to take on the higher responsibilities. And I was speaking to the faculty after the Guard of Honor to say that NDA is opening up the doors for the girls to join from June 22. And you would be very pleased, girls, to know that about 2 lakh girls filled up the form to join NDA. I have only one daughter, and she's in the Air Force. If I had more daughters, I would have put all of them in Fauj. I'm so happy to see the young girls because I'm coming from Air Force Academy where we trained the girls to become pilots. And I flew with a couple of them, and in no way I find them any shade lesser than the boys in any count. And it's the modern India that we are seated in. And I urge the people in front to pass on as much information and guidance as we can to the young generation, like it was said, that the future of this country is lying and seated here amongst us. Lieutenant General Vinayak Patankar and Group Captain Heman Sardesai were the people who actually saw this war, saw the war from a very close quarters. We have only read about it and we have only heard about it. To see the enemy and to fight is a different thing. Like today, I was mentioning to somebody that General Bipin Rawat is probably the highest ranking serving officer in this country who has died with his boots on. And his name is etched, will be etched in the National Defense Academy. And tomorrow morning, the whole academy is paying homage at Hut of Remembrance. The passion of Dr. Rajiv Sastrabudhe, Dr. Bharat Vandake, and Mr. Sudhir Gade is praiseworthy to continue the legacy which started over 160 years ago by this wonderful organization. I read about it before coming here, and it has produced one of the finest professionals in this part of the country who are tenanting such important positions. And Gokhale sir was the vice chief when I was in the air headquarters. And it was an absolute joy and pleasure for me when he asked me to come and be here this evening with all of you. Thank you very much, sir. I am a student of history, and I always tell people that history teaches you so many lessons. Amongst you, all those who have read history or are fond of history, or those who are not even fond of history, I'll share a few things with you. India is a land where everybody came and studied. India was a land where every person in this world wanted to come and take education. India was a land where every vertical of science, astrophysics, maths, astrology, Ayurveda, medicine, astronomy, you name a thing, metallurgy, was there. To get admission into Nalanda University, people from 40 to 80 countries had to walk for years and months and sail to come and get admission. And people who could not get admission in Nalanda University were accommodated in Takshashila, Ujjain, and other universities of that era. It was till the 11th or the 12th century when the invaders started to come. Because India was called Sone ki Chidiya. And if you read history, every invader, every person has come to this land to loot or plunder. It starts from Alexander. Actually, it's not Alexander. The Indian culture had reached such far west into Turkey and other areas that Bhagwan Shiva's son is called Skan. So Skan became Skan. From there it became Sikandar, and from English it became Alexander. So he came to India hearing the story that this is the land where people could live as long as they wanted. When we read our books, Bhisham Pitama could decide when he wanted to leave his body. That was the level of our ancestral knowledge. The sages, the, the knowledge which that generation had was so far reaching in this world that everybody wanted to come to India. Some came to learn, some came to loot, some came to plunder. And with it, the system changed. With it, when the Westerners, the white men, so as to say, there were only 5 countries which had gunpowder and which had navies. And right from the beginning of 15th century, Britain, France, Portugal, Spain, and Dutch started to loot. England at that stage was called the workshop of the world. All the factories were there. So all these people set out to gather wealth and amass the raw material which could be churned from these factories of the world. And with that came the East India Company, and with that came the period wherein everything was looted and plundered. Indian GDP at that time in the 13th, 14th century was about 33% of the world GDP. China was equivalent. But when the Britishers left us in 1947, in purchasing power parity, people who read economics, our world GDP had dropped to less than 1%. From 33%, we had dropped to 1% in 1947. It was after the economic reforms of 1991 that we have started to rise again. And I keep telling to all the people whom I interact professionally in my institution that today we are at 8.5% GDP. By 2025, India will be a $5 trillion economy. By 2030, India will be a $10 trillion economy. You believe it or not, we are growing at an exceptionally fast rate. India is growing. Today, 18 cities have metros. We are making 50 to 80 kilometers of highway each day. We have 160 airports which are going or in the process of being operationalized. The air travel is exceeding. The economy is growing. We will be a power to reckon with by 2040. And we are in the similar situation as we were many years ago. Today, From England, the factory of the word has shifted to China. Today, the Chinese are again amassing the same thing what the Britishers did at that time. The Chinese navy is growing. The Chinese are making colonies around. The Chinese are started to take the raw material from all over the world and started to take back into their own country to make the factories, churn out more and more things which the world consumes. As India will rise, so would the enemies be feeling threatened. And so would be a time in the coming years that when the people in uniform, and some of you who would be in uniform at that stage, will have to take part in defending like the people in the stage sitting here have done in the past. Please understand the big picture and from that derive where we wish to go. 1971 war is a lesson which you must all remember. Like was covered by Hemu sir, that the East and the West Pakistan was separated geographically. It was not a very good idea, but wherever the Britishers left, they left a lot of problems for the rest of the people to follow. You take it Palestine, you take any country, Israel, anywhere where the Britishers left, they left a lot of problems and a lot of legacy. So they left a lot of problems for India when they left in 47. And to manage the two portions of West Pakistan and East Pakistan was becoming a big problem. The Punjabis who ruled the West Pakistan found themselves feeling that they are very superior and they did not find the Bangladeshis or the Bengalis of that caliber. In fact, all the jute, tea, and other things which were produced in the East was sold off, and the foreign exchange was earned at that time by the West. The actual problem started in 1970. There were no general elections in Pakistan till that time. The first general elections took place in December 1970 for 300 odd seats, and 160 odd seats were won by Awami League, by Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, and 80 odd seats were won by Zulfikar Bhutto. They refused to accept Sheikh Mujibur Rahman as the Prime Minister. And that is where Sheikh Mujibur Rahman started to show the West Pakistanis, the people. And in this process, General Yahya Khan was sent, and he came in the month of March 1971 to then East Pakistan to sort out this problem. They had a lot of meetings. And Zulfikar Bhutto also joined him in March 1971. And he was the person responsible for that. He was also brought in. They felt that if negotiations don't fail, don't give results, General Tika Khan is there to take care of that. These conversations and these engagements failed in 1971. And then, before leaving, General Yahya Khan told General Tika to sort them out. And the mayhem which followed on 25th of March 1971 in Dhaka was the founding principle on which this whole conflict started. Lakhs and lakhs of people were butchered. About 90,000 bodies were found in the streets of Dhaka next morning. And here in India, Indira Gandhi was the Prime Minister. About 1 crore refugees at that stage from East Pakistan started to come into India. $700 million in that time, that's half of our defense budget, was to be spent on supporting this. The states, the neighboring states, raised their hands. India did not have any alliance at that time. Indira Gandhi, along with Soran Singh at that time, who was the External Affairs Minister, called Foreign Minister at that time, went around large number of countries asking aid and help. The Americans gave a cold shoulder to India in 1971 because Pakistan was an ally of. Finally, India could sign a treaty with USSR in Moscow at that stage. Russia was very initially to sign the bonding with India because Russia had supported, USSR at that stage had supported China during 1962 war, and they were aware. But Indira Gandhi was different. She had learnt lessons that the armed forces were not utilized in 1962. And that's how she realized and called for General Manik Shah to come and plan the war. And this war was planned by the three generals of the three services. The attack on Karachi harbor on 4th of December 1971 war, which is celebrated as the Navy Day each year, is a culmination how Admiral Nanda at that stage, Air Force was led by Air Chief Marshal P.C. Lal, and of course Air Chief Marshal Manik Shah, along with his team, told Indira Gandhi that why this period of summers is not a good idea to attack Pakistan. The skirmishes though began, but it gave a preparatory time and is the finest example 50 years ago of the services integration for a common cause. Amongst us are the veterans who have covered the first-hand experiences we have just read in the books. And the lessons drawn for us are very eminent. That together, as we grow, we have to fight together. The nation as one has to be together in the cause which our ancestors and predecessors have set it. And I'm very thankful to this wonderful organization in which we are seated here today, who has created an opportunity for the young generation to be face to face with the veterans who have fought the war and from whom they can take inspiration and take this country ahead. And in the end, I would like to thank each one of the associate people seated here, the veterans, my seniors, people about whom we have read and heard. It's a privilege to be meeting them in person. I wish each one of you good luck, happiness, and Jai Hind.
Thank you, sir. This evening marks the grand finale of the Swarnim Vijay Varsh commemorative lecture series. As the anchor for most of these lectures, I was fortunate to listen to several war veterans narrate the experiences of the war. 50 years have passed, but the memories remain fresh, and the sentiments echoed by each of our speakers are echoed in these lines. I quote, देश से है प्यार तो हर पल ये कहना चाहिए मैं रहूं या ना रहूं भारत ये रहना चाहिए सिलसिला ये बाद मेरे यूं ही चलना चाहिए मैं रहूं या ना रहूं भारत ये रहना चाहिए It is time to conclude the program now, and I request Mr. Sudhir Gade to deliver the vote of thanks. Oh, okay. A change of plan. Yes, the Air Marshal wishes to felicitate Sahasrabuddhe sir. To Gokhale sir now. Thank you, Air Marshal Kapoor, for that very sweet gesture on your part. And now I invite Mr. Sudhir Gade to give the vote of thanks.
Namaste and good evening to everyone. It is indeed my pleasure to propose the vote of thanks at the end of this lecture series. At the outset, I express my sincere gratitude to Air Marshal Sanjeev Kapoor for chairing today's session and for his inspirational words. While I was listening to Air Marshal Kapoor, I just remembered a famous quote: longer you back, longer you look back, further you can look forward. So Air Marshal Kapoor almost covered the 2000 years history, as well as he had forecasted for few many years ahead. Thank you, Air Marshal. I sincerely thank Lieutenant General Vinayak Patankar and Group Captain Heman Sardesai for elaborating the actual events which occurred in the war. Lieutenant General Patankar told us about airborne operations, and we are very fortunate, let me say once again, that we have the war veteran who finally assaulted the Pakistani army, and that resulted into victory. That is Group Captain Heman Sardesai. Thank you to both of you, sir. I'm very grateful to President Maharashtra Education Society as well as Director CAS, Air Marshal Bhushanji Gokhale retired, because it was basically his idea to conduct such a lecture series. And let me tell the audience who had joined this lecture in person as well as through online mode. In this 8 lecture series, we had covered all the wars which were fought after the independence of India. We started with 1947 war with the first lecture, and today we are concluding this series with the 1971 war. My sincere thanks to Bhushanji Gokhale, sir. Today, a book was published by a very young war veteran and Sharat Chandra Pathak sir. My thanks to Sharat Chandra Pathak sir, his family members, for publishing this book and making this book available to MES institutions. Thank you, sir. Chairman of governing body of Maharashtra Education Society, architect Rajiv Sahasrabuddhe, is always keen to look into the details to work out the entire scheme as well as guiding at every step. My sincere thanks to Rajiv Ji Sahasrabuddhe. Now, the preparations for this today's lecture is on for last few days, and I especially thank to NDA officials who visited this campus for few times before this lecture to making all the arrangements to take all the things into account. So my sincere thank to NDA officials. Governing body members of Maharashtra Education Society and life members body are present in this lecture series, so I thank them all. In this lecture series, we heard many eminent personalities, but I wish to mention few of them. We started with Ambassador Ashok Gokhale, Lieutenant General Ashok Joshi, Lieutenant General Mehta, Brigadier Jathar, Brigadier Gokhale, Group Captain Beur, for enlightening the audience for various wars which we fought after the independence. The special or unique feature of this lecture series that we had the speakers from Bangladesh also who were the part of the Mukti Baini. They joined through the online mode, as well as High Commissioner of Bangladesh, present High Commissioner of Bangladesh in Mumbai. He was here on the March lecture. So I extend my thanks to all of them. For yes, Brigadier Apte, who was also a speaker in this lecture series. I extend my thank to Brigadier Apte also. For making this program success, for today's program, our girl cadets from MES Rani Lakshmibai Mulinchi Sainiki Shala, who were present here, who gave the guard of honor to Air Marshal Sanjeev Kapoor. I thank to school committee officials as well as principal of military school, as well as I extend my thank to IMCC director and his staff, Bal Shikshan Mandir English medium headmistress and her staff, Professor Vinay Chati, who is the head of the Department of Journalism and Communication, his staff members, as well as his students for supporting all these lecture series throughout the year. Also, I wish to extend my thanks to Mr. Sachin Amberdekar, who is CEO of MES, and his staff members from the MES head office. As well as there are many war veterans who are present in person for this lecture series today, as well as many people they have joined through online mode. So I extend my sincere thanks to everybody. There is a special mention of Dr. Leena Chandorkar, who anchored most of the lectures of this lecture series. I thank Dr. Leena Chandorkar, and some of the lectures, they were anchored by Professor Apurva Barve of IMCC. So I thank Professor Apurva Barve also. NCC wing of Abasaheb Garware College and Garware College of Commerce, the cadets, their officers, they were keen to make it happen, and all the cadets, they were present for all the lecture series. So I extend my sincere thanks to all of them. If I have missed somebody, there is one more person on my list, Mr. Yogendra Kunte, who is here, who is always enthusiastic and keeping all the things moving. So I extend my thanks to Yogendra Kunte. All dignitaries who are present in the auditorium, Mr. Anil Lene, who is here from London, other war veterans, other eminent personalities who have joined this lecture in person as well as in online mode. I thank everybody. If mistakenly I have missed somebody, then I express my apology. I thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Gadi sir. And now it is time for the national anthem. All rise for the national anthem.
जनगण मन अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड उत्कल बंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्चल जलधि तरंगा तव शुभ नामे जागे तव शुभ आशीष मांगे गाहे तव जय गाथा जन गण मंगलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे जन